Genetics as a social determinant of health. When you hear the words genetics and social determinants of health, you may be wondering how those words fit together. Our DNA is just our DNA, right? We get half our chromosomes from one parent and half from the other, and we're stuck with that for the rest of our lives. Well, that's not the whole story. Our DNA, or sequence of nitrogenous bases A, T, C, and G, that are transcribed and translated into proteins can't change, but the way that those genes are expressed can change. This is where the epigenetic theory comes into the picture. Epi means above, and genetic means genome, so epigenetics is anything that happens above the genome level. So imagine that your DNA is like a sentence. The sequence of bases is like the order of the letters in the sentence, and epigenetics is everything else that you can do with the sentence, like adding an apostrophe or a period or an exclamation point. Epigenetics encompasses processes that can change gene expression, not DNA sequence. These changes can occur for a multitude of reasons, including stressful and traumatic life experiences, and the changes can be inherited. There are three main mechanisms through which epigenetic changes occur. These mechanisms involve histones, methyl groups, and acetyl groups. Histones are protein complexes that DNA is wrapped around during its organization into chromosomes. Histones can move along a DNA strand, and as they do so, they can turn on and off different segments of the DNA by preventing molecules like RNA polymerase from accessing them. Acetyl groups bind to histones and relax the DNA that is wrapped around them, making the section of DNA more accessible and more easily expressed. Methyl groups bind to the cytosine bases in the DNA sequence. Methylation of DNA segments silences genes, and this epigenetic change can in some cases be passed from parents to children. These epigenetic changes are part of the reason why two people with the exact same DNA but different life experiences can have very different health outcomes.
For a moment, imagine your health as a Ferris wheel. Health is best when it is spinning perfectly. Everything is in order and held firmly together. The spokes are thick and strong and well secured to the middle axis point. So let's look at the elements that comprise this wheel. Let's imagine every spoke as a social determinant of health. Income and social status, employment and working conditions, education and literacy, childhood experiences, physical environment, social supports and coping skills, healthy behaviors, access to health services, gender, culture, and race. According to one source, biology and genetic endowment is better described as a fundamental determinant of health, opposed to a social determinant of health. So imagine that it is placed at the axis point in the middle where all the spokes meet. All parts are structured together and rely on each other to spin this Ferris wheel into optimal health. So how does epigenetics play into all this? All of the social determinants of health can influence biology and genetic endowment to some degree or another through epigenetics. Think of epigenetics as influencing the thickness of each spoke. It can work in favor of your health, which in this case the spokes would be thick and strong, or it can be a mechanism of poor health outcomes, which in this case the spokes will be thin and weaker. Essentially, any form of physical or psychological stress present in your life has an impact on the stability of the spokes through epigenetics. The thickness of the spokes has an effect on the structure of the wheel, which ultimately affects its ability to turn. Let's take a person who has a cancer gene that has been passed down through generations, and this person lives near a toxic dump, for example. The toxins in their environment puts physical stress on their cells and make them more predisposed to expressing that cancer gene. This makes that physical environment spoke weaker, and the Ferris wheel starts to creak a bit. Now, let's say this person lost their job and is now smoking to cope with stress, which poorly affects their genetic expression. This weakens the healthy behavior spoke, and this wheel slows down. Now let's add in another layer. While this is happening and the spokes are getting thinner and weaker, this burden is transferred to other spokes through the center axis, which represents genetic expression. Or in other terms, your biology and genetic expression are being influenced by your social and physical environment, which in this case are the social determinants of health. Now, let's look at how biology and genetic endowment can influence all the social determinants of health. Let's run with the same example and say poor circumstances prevail and that person does end up expressing that cancer gene. The axis of the Ferris wheel, which represents genetics, is now all run down and can't support all the spokes, and this causes some of them to get loose. Maybe they lose their job and the employment spoke becomes loose. And this also affects the income spoke, causing it to come loose because the central axis point can no longer sustain it. Now the wheel is super creaky and frail and turning very slow, which can have a domino effect on exasperating other social determinants of health. This is a dire example because maybe that person has good social support and through their cancer journey, they are eating healthy foods and can take time to rest because someone is helping them pay their bills. Those healthy habits interact with genes to strengthen the spokes and hence the middle axis. There is potential to rebuild and resecure the spokes on the Ferris wheel to the middle point and allow it to turn more smoothly once again, restoring health. Overall, biology and genetic endowment isn't directly a social determinant of health, but it's the mechanism through which all the social determinants of health influence each other.
As Mackenzie illustrated with her Ferris wheel example in the previous part of the video, epigenetic mechanisms provide an explanation as to how the psychological, social, and ecological aspects of our lives become determinants of our biological or genealogical life, and how our biology can become a determinant of the psychological, social, and ecological aspects of our lives. For aspiring healthcare professionals, the field of epigenetics is significant because it gives a voice to the social determinants of health that fits within the language of the biomedical model. At some point in your lives, many of you would likely have heard of the concept of survival of the fittest. This concept is founded on the Darwinian theory of evolution, wherein random genetic mutations increase or decrease the capacity of an organism to survive in a particular environment. This process is referred to as natural selection and supports the beliefs of genetic determinism. The study of epigenetics challenges the genetic determinism inherent to Darwinian evolution. A key concept which forms the basis of the biological sciences and is thusly deeply ingrained in the biomedical model, in which it serves as a blockade to the acceptance of many of the social determinants of health. This, to me, is a huge part of why epigenetics is relevant to healthcare professionals and an exciting area of research. As the leading Canadian epigeneticist, Dr. Moshe Seif, says, evolutionary theory is a difficult one to change because it became almost religion, a religion of science, and any questioning of it seems to be a heretical question of the whole system, which it obviously is not. Epigenetics doesn't deny evolution. Epigenetics is part of evolution, but it demands a new look at how evolution works. The new biology improves upon the standard Darwinian view of spontaneous mutations and random selection as the motors of species adaptations. It demonstrates that circumstances themselves can shape how genes adjust to the environment. In other words, all the social determinants of health likely have yet to be discovered impacts on our epigenomes. Additionally, epigenetics helps us understand how intergenerational trauma is passed from generation to generation. It provides hope that increasing our understanding of epigenetic mechanisms can help us to prevent repeating the mistakes of the past with BIPOC folk, as well as come up with new and advanced treatments to help the now epigenetically endowed social inequities we see in these communities today. To illustrate with an example from my own life, I want to introduce you all to my partner, Alex.
Hi, everyone.
Alex is a first-generation Mexican-Canadian, and the reason my environment currently looks like this. Alex lives with the chronic autoimmune disease Crohn's. It took Alex 3 years to get his Crohn's diagnosis because of the deeply ingrained genetic determinism in the medical field. Time and time again, when he was going through his diagnosis process, he was told by Canadian doctors, Mexicans, genetically speaking, don't get Crohn's. The field of epigenetics is exciting to me because as the body of research continues to grow, it will hopefully help to dismantle toxic perspectives such as this that result from the genetic determinism deeply ingrained into medical training and resultantly medical practice. As more and more healthcare professionals come to understand that even our genetics are a product of circumstance, the easier it may become to provide compassionate, client-centered care to all. Additionally, the field of epigenetics offers hope in the research questions it sparks. Maybe one day the field of epigenetics will provide answers as to the mechanisms behind how, if at all, growing up as a first-generation Mexican Canadian in rural Nova Scotia impacted Alex's gene expression, and how, if at all, these changes in gene expression led to his development of Crohn's. As an aspiring dietitian, I often wonder how, if at all, Alex's inability now, due to his Crohn's, to eat many of his Mexican culture's traditional corn-based foods currently influences his gene expression, and how, if at all, those influences are impacting his disease prognosis. What, if at all, will be the legacy of this for our children? Maybe one day in the future, healthcare professionals will know exactly what epigenetic markers to look for to determine onset of diseases earlier. Possibly, epigenetics will provide new treatment options through epigenetic modifications of our gene expression via person-specific, non-invasive lifestyle interventions. Finally, epigenetics may one day serve to provide the information and quantitative data needed within the biomedical model to increase funding for social and public health programs and develop policy that better addresses the social determinants of health. As Candace Lewis, a neuroscientist from Arizona State University whose research is in early childhood development and epigenetics, says, as a specialist in the complexity of brain and behavior, I know it's not just brain and behavior. One of the biggest take-home messages from my work is how malleable we are as organisms, how responsive we are to environmental cues throughout the lifespan. More and more, the science is demonstrating this holistic model of who we are. It's more than just what's enclosed in our skin. It's everything we are surrounded by. Not to see this is to remove healing from medicine. Thank you.